Well, the Donetsk People's Republic Information Ministry has released video allegedly showing Ukrainian forces shooting and beating Russian prisoners of war. We will not show the disturbing video, just some heavily redacted slides as it portrays bound soldiers lying on the ground with multiple bullet wounds to their legs, while others have broken bones. The head of Russia's investigative committee has ordered an investigation into the incident. Ukrainian officials gave this comment.
I remind everyone that abusing prisoners of war is a war crime that does not carry amnesty under international law and does not have a statute of limitations. We are a European army of a European country. We treat prisoners according to the Geneva Convention, no matter what your personal emotional motives may be.
Yeah, the view from Kiev. Well, let's talk through then what's in those videos with RT correspondent Paula Sleer joining me in the studio. Hi, Paula. The footage is certainly difficult to watch. Take us through what's there.
It's very gruesome footage. It's almost 6 minutes. I had a look at it earlier, and it really is very upsetting. Now, you can hear in the background Ukrainian soldiers saying that they have captured a Russian reconnaissance group. It seems to have happened around 20 miles from the Russian border in the region of Kharkiv. As you mentioned, you see in the video Russian prisoners of war who are lying on the ground. Their hands are tied. They have multiple, looks like stab wounds on their bodies. At the same time, they've been heavily beaten, and they are being interrogated by men with blue armbands, which obviously shows you that they belong to the Ukrainian military, but possibly also to some of the Nazi groups that we've been highlighting. You also then see 3 prisoners of war being ordered out of a van, and then at close range, they are shot in the legs. Now, we are receiving reports that some of those in the video did die during this whole interrogation. In terms of the reaction, we've had a differing reaction from 2 different departments in Ukraine. The Ukrainian government itself has expressed alarm, saying it's going to launch an investigation and that as a European country, it knows its army doesn't behave like this. But there was a request that was also sent to the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, and they did not specifically refer to this incident, but they did say that there were instances in the past where they blamed essentially Russia for staging things like this, where you see Russian soldiers on the ground and Ukrainians mistreating those soldiers. Now, a number of channels, not only ours, have chosen not to show the footage because it is so brutal. But of course, this hasn't stopped journalists from having a conversation that really needs to happen. Let's take a look.
Ukrainian soldiers shoot 2 Russian prisoners of war in the legs and film themselves doing it. Video below shows about 6 other Russian soldiers with similar wounds. Without question, it's a war crime and nothing to justify it. Even if it is not what we would like to report, it still has to be reported. If war crimes don't disturb you because they're against Russians, think about how the soldiers who are willing to shoot unarmed prisoners might be willing to treat Ukrainian civilians.
The videos appear to be true. Russian prisoners of war are being shot in the leg by Ukrainian soldiers, and some might die post-shot.
Now, obviously, we've received a lot of reaction from users as well. Just looking at the extensive Chinese online reaction, you've had people saying things like the Ukrainian forces really need to be destroyed, that they haven't seen any video like this with Russians mocking Ukrainian prisoners of war. The Ukrainians are behaving like the Japanese did in Nanjing, and the Ukrainian army is nothing short of behaving the way ISIS behaved.
Yeah, a lot of reaction there. What about the Kremlin? What have they said?
Well, almost immediately, Moscow said it was launching a probe to what it described as extreme cruelty. We have heard from a Kremlin spokesperson who has said that they will be studying all the facts, after which they would want to know that the people who participated in these tortures are persecuted and are punished.
Well, Paula, it brings up then the point of international law. How might this alleged treatment of the captured soldiers be seen in terms of that?
Well, certainly it's a violation of international law. You already have Human Rights Watch that in the past has sent questions and expressed alarm to the Ukrainian government in terms of the hundreds of thousands of videos that are being uploaded that seem to intimidate Russian soldiers. Of course, it's a breach of the Geneva Convention, which talks about treating prisoners of war with dignity and not putting them at risk or being able to identify them or their families. You have videos in the past, not just like this, but you have where individuals are being named, where their families are being named, where their identities are being given, where you see the soldiers being humiliated humiliated. You see the soldiers being punished. Back on March the 10th, Human Rights Watch sent a request to the Ukrainian government because it was so concerned about these videos. And on March the 16th, it had still not received a response. But we can take a look at that.
Such treatment of prisoners of war violates protections under the Geneva Conventions intended to ensure dignified treatment of captured combatants on all sides. They make clear that prisoners of war must be treated humanely in all circumstances and protected against any act of violence, as well as against intimidation, insults, and public curiosity.
The International Committee for the Red Cross has also come out and expressed concern over what it says is particularly the identification of individual prisoners in such videos.
Paula, thanks very much for taking us through that. And some of the issues that Paula was bringing up there, we will talk about them now with Iyad Nasser. Iyad is independent expert on the law of war, joining us from Doha. You're very welcome, sir. Human Rights Watch previously warned Ukraine on the torture of Russian soldiers, yet this appears to have continued. Why do you think their actions haven't been widely condemned, and indeed those who conducted this alleged torture not held accountable?
I think during war, during armed conflicts, both parties need to exercise control over their troops, over their parties to the conflict. I think, as you described it in your narrative, parties to the conflict need to investigate what we have seen from the action of these people vis-a-vis the alleged Russian soldiers has to be investigated. And those who are doing this kind of behavior, this kind of action, needs to be presented in front of court, regardless if they are civilians, if they are part of the Ukrainian army. They have to be presented in front of court, because this is a direct violation of what is alleged to be attacking prisoners of war who are protected under Geneva Convention 3.
Yeah, it brings up the point as well, doesn't it, that if similar incidents in future are not properly investigated, does that mean, Iyad, that Russia is going to be forced to rely on its own justice system instead of international law?
Well, the jurisdiction for persecuting and putting people to trial lies on the Ukrainian government, because this is their obligation, and these kind of actions happen on the territory of the Ukrainian land, and allegedly these people are responsible by the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainian national courts has to take care of these violations and allegations, unless the soldiers, the violators, fall in the hands of the Russians, where Russia has to present them in front of its courts. If both countries, if Ukraine and Russia fails to put these people to trial, then international tribunals can be brought into the picture.
Okay, thanks for breaking that down. Then in terms of the penalties for violating the Geneva Convention, Iyad, who would be held accountable according to the law?
Well, again, anyone who violates the Geneva Conventions, this is why we have the Geneva Conventions. And in this particular, all the Geneva Conventions 1, 2, 3 applies to this conflict, because also civilians should be protected. Soldiers who fall captured or injured has to be protected. Civilians who are fleeing in terms of being IDPs or refugees has to be protected. So in front of who should be persecuted, everyone who is involved in these incidents, shall they be proven to be soldiers from the Ukrainian army or civilians carrying arms, they have to be presented in front of court. And if these people have a command ship, the command ship, if they don't take action to bring them to court, they need to be also persecuted. At this stage, those involved in these incidents and or those who are giving them the orders to do so, if this exists, has to be presented in front of courts.
Understood, yeah. How can then, just finally, Russia perhaps make sure that those violating the law of war, if it's found to be verified, do face justice and face a fair trial, if those people are often viewed, as you well know, as freedom fighters by the Western world?
Well, regardless, freedom fighters, soldiers, wherever they are, everyone who is party to the conflict has to abide by the law. The law of war applies to everyone. Anyone decides to carry arms has to respect the law and has to show all the measures have been respected for this. If you capture a soldier, if you capture a fighter, this is the end. This is the reason of the war. It's to neutralize your enemy. There is no need to cause more than it should in terms of suffering. I think Russia has to keep the legal framework on the table. The other soldier, the other party to the conflict, should not do the same in response of these violations, because if Russia considers these as grave violations, then the same should not happen to the other party if this happens, because then we will lose even our ethics in war. Ethics and values have to also remain in there. And as we say all the time, even wars have limit. So the law has to be respected. And I think the dialogue between the two enemies, if I may consider it as enemies or the fighting parties, has to ensure that legal measures should be taken in consideration. And this reminds us all with the Article number 1 of the Geneva Conventions that all parties should do their utmost to ensure the respect of the law in all situations and in all times.
Many thanks for breaking all that down for us. Iyad Nasser, independent expert on the law of war.
Thank you.